Throughout the Second World War, there were many men and women who collaborated and worked alongside the Nazis and the Germans. Some people would inform to the SS, who would then round up civilians to be sent to concentration camps, where they were then killed. The Gestapo and the SS would rely on informants to help them, but those who were considered collaborators were dealt with brutally by resistance elements. Some were slaughtered by the French resistance, who would deem those French men and women that helped the Germans as traitors, and they would also be executed at the end of the Second World War. But one man who was a police officer and worked alongside the Germans was Pierre Bonny, but he would be shot in 1944 as he was convicted of being a collaborator and a member of the French Gestapo. But he would be executed alongside two other spies. Join us today as we look at the execution of the corrupt French police officer shot by the resistance. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Pierre Bonny was born on the 25th of January 1895 in Bordeaux to his parents who were both farmers. He had a normal schooling, but then after this he then worked as an office worker at a Peugeot dealership and also at a French shipping company. But as the First World War broke out across Europe, Bonny was drafted into service, but during the Battle of the Somme he was captured as a prisoner of war, and he would then be imprisoned for the rest of the First World War. But in 1918 he was sent back to France, where he worked as a secretary to the General Staff of the Bordeaux military region, and he was given the rank of a corporal. However, at the end of the conflict, he tried to seek a different career for himself, and in 1919 he took the police exams, and he became an inspector for the police force. He was a detective who would work undercover a lot of the time, and Bonny would oversee gambling rings, as well as trade unions and many groups that were considered possible causes of civil unrest. He would also carry out surveillance on foreigners and would help to spy on journalists and the press. But Bonny would also work in counterintelligence, and this was part of his career which was considered rather unknown. He was, it's believed, ordered to work in counterintelligence for the Minister of War. His son would state that Pierre Bonny uncovered a number of leaks which gained him favour. It was said of him, one wonders whether it was not at the time having acquired the reputation of a particular capable man, that some thought of employing Pierre Bonny for work that was rather confidential, but undoubtedly a little undesirable, because it was on the borderline of legality. His son would also later state of his work, no sooner had he joined the police force than, thanks to luck and his special skills, he unconsciously got caught in the ringer, perhaps the most dangerous one of all, parapolitics, so as not to say politics in general. He was accused of falsifying evidence, as he was involved as the investigating officer in the Sesnech case, and because of this he was shunned. The man who was once considered one of the most talented police officers in the country was implicated in scandal and corruption, but he would also later be involved in the Stavisky affair, which was a financial scandal in France. This incident had far-reaching implications and resulted in anti-government demonstrations, in which the Paris police killed 15 demonstrators. But the following year Pierre Bonny would be sent to prison for 3 years, as he was found guilty of corruption, and he was then seen as a disgrace. But as the Second World War broke out in Europe, there would be a huge amount of fear across France. As soon as the Nazis invaded Poland, Hitler would already be drawing his plans to head towards France and to invade the country. France would suffer heavily under German occupation following the invasion. The French divisions and British divisions would be pushed back towards Dunkirk, and they needed rescuing off the beaches. But the French people suffered at the hands of the Germans, and many would collaborate with the invaders and the German forces. For the French resistance, they saw this as the biggest disgrace that a French person could commit, and some women went further, even sleeping with the enemy. These women then had their heads shaved in what became known as the Ugly Carnival, in huge public scenes in French towns and cities. But there were other men and women who would help out the German police, and also the establishments that led to the persecutions of many people. The SS and the Gestapo operated in the country, and many civilians were sent to concentration camps, and people told the authorities of their neighbours and fellow Frenchmen and women. Pierre Bonny, following his time in prison, was released, and he then during the Second World War collaborated with the enemy. During the Nazi occupation of France, he would join the French Gestapo, which became known as the Carlingi. This group was based in Paris, and Bonny was a leader in the group. It's believed that thousands of people joined the secret police, and the group was even infiltrated by a serial killer whose house was on the same street as the Carlingi headquarters, and it was believed that the group sometimes helped dispose of the victims' bodies. But the Carlingi would be involved in counterinsurgency operations against the French resistance, and they would hunt down members of the resistance and then interrogate them. Often they were sent to concentration camps or were executed after they were tortured by the group. The Carlingi had very corrupt members who would be involved in the black market. However, Pierre Bonny continued to collaborate and work with the Nazi authorities. They knew that he would be useful as a police detective, and his skills were put to work. However, as the war turned against the Germans following D-Day and Operation Barbarossa, the Allies would push the occupiers back towards Germany. In different French cities and towns, the French resistance would round up different collaborators. Some were executed straight away for their collaboration with the enemy, and many others were punished heavily. Pierre Bonny had been for some time known to have been working for the Gestapo, and because of this he was, following the liberation of Paris, placed on trial for war crimes. After a short trial in which the courtroom heard the extent of his collaboration, along with 2 other members of the Carlingi, he was sentenced to death. The perception of Pierre Bonny was that as he was a traitor who happily collaborated, he was also a corrupt individual who would do the dirty work for the Gestapo. But on the 26th of December 1944, Pierre Bonny was brought out to a firing range at Fort de Montrouge. Gathered for his execution was a French firing squad who were in their military outfits, and they were armed with a rifle. Bonny was led out to what appeared to be a forest, where a number of stakes were placed at the side of a road. The firing squad were waiting, and then Bonny was tied to a stake and his arms and legs were secured to it, so he could not move. Following this, the firing squad were then told to ready, as members of the French resistance would look on and act as witnesses to the proceedings. Following final checks, the firing squad were readied. They then quickly fired a salvo into Bonny and the 2 other collaborators, and instantly the men were killed as the commanding officer approached to give coup de grace gunshots in case they were not killed instantly. Pierre Bonny was at one point considered one of the most talented police officers in France, and he was involved in solving a number of high-profile cases. But he was a man who could be swayed towards the corrupt side of the police force, and he was imprisoned before the war. But as the Germans invaded the country, he was a man who would work with the Gestapo and other evil agencies and groups that were responsible for the deportations and executions of many innocent people. He was, following the liberation of Paris, arrested, and he was considered one of the worst collaborators in the city, but for this he was sentenced to death, and in front of a coppice or a wood, he would be tied to a stake and he was shot by his firing squad. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.